Good evening, everyone. I'm Billy. I'm an alcoholic. Get a couple of things out of the way. We'll start with the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Couple of things if you've never been here before. There is a private Facebook group where we put the recordings. I will put my email and my WhatsApp there if you need to get in that. If you don't have Facebook, we will try to find another way if you need recordings. But we say the serenity prayer because it's a good way to start an AA gathering. But let's just call it what it is. I'm actually sitting in my backyard. This is no different than all of you in my backyard. It is not a meeting or a group or any official AA thing at all. The only difference is there's a bunch of people who don't have the camera on, and you wouldn't be able to do that in my backyard. So, and it's not a gathering, and I only do this because I happen to serve as a delegate for 2 years and below the level of the conference for 12 years at a very probably unusually young age than most people who serve in those positions. So as such, not wanting to be a thief from AA and rotating out a lot younger than most people, I can give it back by passing on anything. It does not mean I'm an expert. It does not mean that I need anything else recorded. It doesn't mean that I put anything on YouTube myself because I do not. In fact, I spend time sending YouTube notes to take down things. When people, I think you remember last week, I talked about people love to quote literature except leave like the page before and the page after out, or they love to quote a Bill W. letter and leave something out. Well, the people who post to YouTube sometimes do that. They don't post the whole concept or the whole whatever was the AA convention. They like take a snippet that works in their favor. So I do not post on YouTube. And I would probably honestly had a cigar lit. I'd much rather have a cigar lit right now and getting ready to watch NCAA basketball, to be perfectly honest. So this is not convenient. Um, this is anonymous, though. So just a warning out there. Do not hold your phone up in front of the screen. If your camera is on, you'll just be removed from the meeting. We just have to watch out for people's anonymity. And I'll remind everyone that it's conference season. The conference is in a couple of weeks, the General Service Conference. A lot of you have probably been to assemblies or district meetings. We've gone over agenda items and everything else. And because of that, and because of my great respect for the people currently serving as delegates and the current conference, no questions about conference topics are allowed here. It's very important that we honor that and that you work through your district and your delegate if you want to get your voice heard, which means you should have a home group. You should have a home group where you go to your business meetings, and that's where you exercise your vote. Now, tonight we're talking about a tradition and a concept that can bring up some challenging subjects. We're talking about tradition 4 and concept 4. I will share my experience. Of course, I'm not perfect. My opinion could get in a little bit, but I try to just share my experience. But these are two often taken out of context principles. They're in the top of the list of 12. If you had a 25% list of the ones that are most abused, tradition 4 and concept 4, they fall right there. So I'm sure you're all familiar with. So in case there is anybody new here, you'll hear it on the recordings, but please have a 12 and 12, and please have a Traditions Illustrated and an AA comes of age, like have all of them. That's the only real place to learn about where this stuff all comes from. But Tradition 4 starts out problematic right from the go. And it's because of the difference between the short and the long form. The short form says each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. Okay. The long form does not even use the autonomous word. It just says, with respects to its own affairs, I want to stress that, with respect to its own affairs, each AA group should be responsible to no other authority than its own conscience. But when its plans concern the welfare of neighboring groups also, those groups ought to be consulted. And no group, regional committee, or individual should ever take any action that might greatly affect AA as a whole without conferring with the trustees of the General Service Board. On such issues, our common welfare is paramount. And then, as you know, I don't get paid enough to read to all of you, so I don't read. Reading is reading comprehension comes from you reading it or me reading it. But I will read the first line of Tradition 4, which points out the autonomy word, which says autonomy is a $10 word. Now, if you don't know what that is, I would ask you to just go to Google without putting your phone near the screen and just put $10 word definition so that you know I'm not making it up. It's an idiom for a long, uncommon, or complex word used to appear sophisticated or knowledgeable. In other words, it's a bullshit artist word. It's a word to make you sound smarter than you are. Okay, that's what it is. And the long form is so much better. I want to go slow a little bit so that we can explain this a little bit and give some examples. The International Convention is going to be in Vancouver over July 4th weekend. I'm sure a lot of you know, and I hope a lot of you are going. It's been planned for a long time, 10 years. At my home group business meeting next week, I do not get to make a motion that Vancouver is inconvenient and the Tell It Like It Is group wants to move it to Dallas, where more people would be able to go. It's in the middle of the country. You don't have to cross a border if you live in the United States. And then the day after, I'll call GSO and say, hey, just want to let you know, we decided down in Palm Beach Gardens that Vancouver is a horrible spot. We've moved it to Dallas. Now, I think most of you would know that that is a pretty extreme comment, and you would hope the person at GSO, if I ever did make a call like that, would do what we always do with alcoholics. Thank you for calling. Thanks for sharing. Hope you have a great day. But know that I'm completely insane, right? Like that's how insane that statement is, that my group can move the International Convention. And I say that because the first thing you have to keep in the back of your mind for the fourth tradition is, does my group have the group conscience to change what I want to change? So let me give you a couple of examples that for whatever reason, we just let go by. So we know that my group is not the group conscience for the International Convention. Okay. What about the preamble? Now, I know there are people who don't like the new preamble, but the AA preamble starts off, Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people. That's the group conscience of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, you might not like it, but your group does not have authority over the preamble. That belongs to the General Service Conference. Some groups don't like the closed meeting card. They add things to it, but that card is a service piece from GSO. That's who controls the group conscience there. You always have to ask yourself, because what it says is, with respects to its own affairs, each AA group should be responsible to no other authority but itself. It doesn't say with regards to the blue card, or with regards to the preamble, or with regards to the definition of the third or fifth tradition. It doesn't say any of that. It says your own affairs. So what is the fourth tradition talking about? It's talking about Earl Grey tea and English breakfast tea. And God forbid your meeting wants to have decaf. And it's talking about a cake with candles instead of individual cupcakes. It's even talking about what time your meeting starts. And is it an hour or an hour and a half meeting? And do you have a fellowship break or not? It's even talking about what kind of meeting are you? Are you an open or closed meeting? That's a meeting. That's a decision for your group. It's talking about, are you a big book study, an open discussion, a closed discussion, a beginner's meeting, a 12 and 12, a grapevine, a traditions meeting? All of that stuff, a group gets to decide. But group consciences, and I'll give you an example or just a little lesson to just put in the back of your mind. And whether it happens in a couple of weeks or sometime during this year, you can remember that I said this, but it will happen. That I guarantee. You are going to hear someone, this is one of those things that people love to throw out at a business meeting or a district or an assembly. They love to like wait online or have their hand up and they say, our fourth tradition autonomy lets us do this. Usually when you hear that, a truck is backing up over a couple of other traditions. That's usually what's going on. And what's really important to know is that all 12 traditions are equal. None is first among many. All 12 are equal. The fourth tradition is not a veto for any of the other 12 traditions. It's a standalone tradition about local issues. It does not apply. And sometimes people get a little carried away with that. Now, we always have the example of, I have a 7 o'clock meeting, somebody else wants to start a 7 o'clock meeting, should they have to ask my permission? I've read as much AA literature as I can read, and God knows, I believe there are too many meetings and not enough groups. That's my personal belief, okay? But I have not read anywhere where it says that you have to tell another group you're starting a meeting. Is it nice and polite? Yes. But the wording, but when its plans concern the welfare of neighboring groups also, those groups ought to be consulted. Well, are you taking the same people? That could affect them. Are you meeting in the same building? This is one where a lot of AA groups and meetings step all over each other. Many different AA groups and meetings meet in the same facility. They have their own relationship with that community center or that church. If you behave badly or you leave it in horrible shape, or if you constantly pay your bill late, your rent late, you're affecting other groups. See, because for the outside world, I just got done I was at a young people's event, and I grew up in young people's AA, so I love it, but I also am very real about what goes on sometimes. Is if you talk to people who work in the hotel business who rent us rooms and rent us convention space, we need those places. We have fellowship events. But do you know what happens when one AA convention goes the wrong way? The hotel does not remember it was the Day at a Time convention or the Young People convention or the Fellowship of the Spirit or God knows what its name is. They just remember that AA was not a good customer, that they left the place in very bad shape. They didn't listen to rules. They vaped on the elevator. They vaped in the meetings. Like, nobody remembers anything except Alcoholics Anonymous. And if your group does anything to give AA a bad reputation, then they have gone too far. I just talked about this weekend because there is a group in my state that insists on being, and they were taken out of the local meeting directory, but they still exist, and they insist on reading Psalms and things from the Bible in their group. And that is a way over the line 10th tradition problem. It's also a way over the line affiliation problem of tradition 6 that we don't have an opinion on outside issues, but particularly alcohol reform, politics, and sectarian religion. And we don't do anything to make it look like we're affiliated. Now, for those of us, most of us in this screen, if we went to that meeting, we would be just like, wow, this is unusual, odd, the best way I could characterize it. But it wouldn't stop me from going back to AA. But if you're somebody with 2 days who didn't want to go to AA because you thought it was super religious or church, if you go in and start hearing Psalms read, you're out. You're gone. Especially, as I always say, from the podium. Sometimes I wish we would have a separate manual for people who are leading meetings, chairing meetings, speaking at meetings. Because if you're just in your seat at a meeting and you say that Jesus is your higher power and you found that Jesus as a result of the 3rd step and becoming more in touch with your spirituality, that's your own individual story. And if you're not saying that someone else has to believe it, who am I to judge? That's kind of your 3rd and 11th step story. But if you're, however, leading a meeting and the newcomer thinks you're the president of AA because they've never been to AA before, they might think they have to believe that way. So a 4th tradition kind of focus on chair people and speakers has to happen, that we're not saying things that imply AA in other ways. But the 4th tradition is for our local matters. I hear this brought up all the time, and all I can say is the traditions, the steps, and the concepts were written vertically. They go up and down, not across. The traditions and the concepts were not written to have concept 1 match with step 1 and tradition 1 match with step 1, and the same for step 6 and tradition 6 and concept 6. Now, individuals, maybe even like myself, I will not do it anymore because it's historically inaccurate. But I'm open-minded enough that individuals might weave their own connection to step 1, tradition 1, and concept 1. But it's important that they point that out, that that's their individual take, not that that's how Bill W. wrote them, because they were written individually and vertically and not horizontally. So I think I told everybody last week when we talked about concept 4, I think I mentioned to bring a pen and a calculator if you have a phone, a calculator, whatever. But I would ask you, because it's important, because this gets so confusing, to open your book to page 12 and 13 in the concepts, the concept 4. And if you have a pen, and I'll read it first. Throughout our conference structure, we ought to maintain at all responsible levels a traditional right of participation, taking care that each classification or group of our world servants shall be allowed a voting representation in reasonable proportion to the responsibility that each must discharge. I'm going to say one thing about Tradition 4 before I go on here. This workshop's about applying these principles to AA. But if I were to throw in one Tradition 4 to applying to your life, it would be the thing I always say. There's only two kinds of business: my business and none of my business. The problem I have, like a lot of other people, it seems, in AA, is I confuse the two. I tend to make what's not my business, and what I should be taking care of my business, I'm totally irresponsible. But that's why Tradition 4 is so great. Local affairs, like I should treat my life like that, like my local business, me. That's what I have autonomy on. I do not have autonomy on things like the speed limit, stop signs, driving regulations, paying bills on time, all kinds of things, waiting in line, violating how many packages I can have in the express line. I do not have autonomy on any of those things. It's very freeing to realize I have only autonomy for the things that I control, which is not a lot. So let's go back to concept 4. If you have a pen, this is what I'm going to suggest. I'll read the concept again and I'm going to stop. Throughout our conference structure, we ought to maintain at all responsible levels a traditional right of participation. Draw a line up and down right there between participation and the quotes before the word taking. Put a line right there. Then it says, taking care that each classification or group of our world servants, between the S in servants and the S in shall, draw another line up and down. Then shall be allowed a voting representation, draw another line between representation and the word in. And then the last part is in reasonable proportion to the responsibility that each must discharge. So there is really 4 statements in concept 4 that are so important to understand what they're all saying. And finally, when someone did this for me a long time ago, it finally clicked for me. I was like, why don't they make the book like that? You know, like you all know, I say it, like I tend to be a little neurodivergent in the way I read and the way I learn. Like, why don't we put it there? It drives me as crazy as how it works. There are 3 pertinent ideas and then they letter them. Who wrote that book? Right? Should be 3 pertinent ideas, 1, 2, 3. But it's AA. So let's talk about the 4 parts I just divided for you to make things easy. Throughout our conference structure, we ought to maintain at all responsible levels a traditional right of participation. Part 1. And then it tells us how we're going to do that. Taking care that each classification or group of world servants, so there's 4 groups of world servants they're talking about at the conference level. I don't know why they don't put it in there, but it's not in there. But it's 4 groups. Area delegates, about 93 of them. Trustees, and by the way, the bylaws say that every voting member is a delegate. We like to talk about us and them like it's the board versus the delegates, but the bylaws of the trustees say that every voting member of the conference is a delegate. So we really have four kinds of delegates. Taking care that each classification or group of world servants, so the first classification group is area delegates. The second group is trustee delegates. The third group is director delegates. And the fourth group is staff delegates, special worker delegates. 93 of the area delegates, 21 usually of the trustee delegates, 6 usually of the director delegates, and about 15 to 17 usually, depending on the staffing and who's new and who can't vote. But let's just say about 17 members of GSO and Grapevine staff delegates. Those are the four groups: area delegates, trustees, non-trustee directors, and staff. That's who votes at the General Service Conference. That's what they're talking about when they say taking care that each classification or group of our world servants. And then the next part, shall be allowed a voting representation. Okay. So what does that mean? There's 17 staff members this year. So I'm just going to go with 21. I'm just going to go with 93 plus 21 plus 6 plus 17. 137 voting members of the conference, right? That's what we have this year. Shall be allowed a voting representation. Okay. What's the delegates' voting representation? 93 divided by 137. They're 67%. The area delegates are 67% of the voters at the General Service Conference this year. What about the trustees? 21 divided by 137. The trustees are about 15% of the voting members of this year's General Service Conference. What about the non-trustee director delegates? 6 divided by 137. They're only 4%, give or take a fraction, of the voters this year. And then what about the staff? 17 divided by 137. The staff are about 12%. Now, it might be off by 1% or so because of fractions, but that's basically what you have. Because then what it says is the most important line. In reasonable proportion to the responsibility that each must discharge. So what does that mean? Each group is allowed a voting representation proportionate to the responsibility they discharge. So there's two important things to look at the General Service Conference as far as voting goes. The 137 individual voters are equal to each other. Each have one vote. But the classifications are not equal to each other. They're very unequal, and it was started that way for a reason. The groups have 67%. The next largest group is the trustees at 15%. The reasonable proportion means it's reasonable since Bill and Bob left AA to the AA groups, that the area delegates who represent the AA groups have the largest proportion. That's what's reasonable. The trustees have the next most reasonable proportion because they are responsible for the voluntary contributions. They're responsible for the 2 corporate boards and naming the directors on those corporate boards. They're responsible for the day-to-day activity of AA between General Service Conferences. The directors, the 3 non-trustee directors on each corporate board, the 6 I was talking about, they're not trustees, they're non-trustee directors, so they have a very small proportion, 4%. And then the staff have almost the same as the trustees, the 17 to 21 people compared. But the reasonable proportion, someone just asked me, I'm going to put it in one more time and that's it. Send me an email if you want to find the recordings, or send me a text or a WhatsApp. Okay, so that's what that whole big convoluted paragraph means. Those are our classification of service workers. That's who make it up. And the reasonable proportion is that the groups are not equal to each other, but each individual voter is equal. But at the end of the day, the AA groups have the biggest chunk of voters. Now, the right of participation is super important because it happens all over AA. It says in the first paragraph, the principle of participation has been carefully built into our conference structure. The conference charter specifically provides that the trustees and directors of our service corporations, together with their respective executive staff, shall always be voting members of the General Service Conference. We like participation. And we have to give people who have authority the right to participate. Or I shouldn't even say authority is the right to participate. People who have a job to do, we can't not give them the authority to do it. I learned a lesson like this at work a long time ago. My division was having a big event. A couple of us noticed that one person we worked with was in a bad state of mind, like a horrible attitude. Somebody who's usually a bright, shining star. And at the end of the day, we found out, no wonder. They're like one of the most important people in our division, and we didn't invite them to this big event we were having. Like, how disempowering is that? And, you know, inside groups and areas and districts, and even at the board level, if you want people to participate, you got to let them participate. You can't just tell them to do a lot of work and not have a vote or not have a voice. You got to like give them a way to participate. Now, some people say we are not going down the road. There are, the last couple of years, the General Service Conference has faced a lot of issues. And it's caused some division and some sides. But the two things I would point out are this. There is a line in here, it talks about on page 14 about, well, isn't it unfair that the trustees and staff vote? But Bill W. put a caution, a stop sign here. And recently, a couple of years ago, there was a motion to censure the General Service Board. And a few of those trustees have said they made an error at that time. I'm not putting words in their mouth. They said it at microphones. And the error they made is they didn't take Bill W.'s suggestion in concept 4. It says one argument for taking away the trustee vote at the conference is this. It is urged that there is a danger if we allow the trustees to vote on their own past performance. For example, their annual reports. But then Bill says this. To a certain extent, this argument is sound. As a matter of tradition, there is no doubt that the trustees and service workers alike should refrain from voting on reports of their own past activities. Now, I think the reason the trustees, the some of them that said they made a mistake, said it is because a censure is like a slap on the wrist that don't do something again. That's what a censure is. But it has to be for something in the past. Unless we have some like clairvoyant alcoholic delegates who want to censure the board for something they think they're going to do in 2 months. But a censure is for past behavior. It's very clear here that the trustees and staff should not be voting on things that involve approving their own past activities. Now, let's go on to what I think is one of the most important things. And that is your right to have your own opinion in AA service. Now, hopefully your opinion is based on your experience, and hopefully it's based on AA literature. I hope all of that. But one of the things that I see common sometimes is that we confuse unity for unanimity. A unanimous vote does not mean unity in Alcoholics Anonymous. A group conscience, an informed group conscience, means unity in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it says here, because people talk about, I hear so many things said about the boards and the trustees, and so many of them are just not, they were not my experience for sure. And I can be opinionated, and I have no problem quoting from literature and standing up for what I think is right, but I never felt like I wasn't allowed to do that. And sometimes in AA today, I think at all levels of service, district, area, conference, if you ask questions, you get labeled a troublemaker. And that's not what Concept 4 says. Now, if you ask questions like a jerk, if you're a jerk at the microphone, if you're a sit at the back of the room, roll your eyes, shout out without going to the microphone kind of person, then you're a jerk. We're not talking about that. But if you simply have a difference of opinion and state it in a dignified way at the microphone, or if there's not a microphone, just state it, and you accept the group conscience, because what it says here is, it says on page 15, perhaps some will object that on close votes in the conference, the combined trustees and service worker ballots may decide a particular question, meaning the trustees and the GSO and AAWS staff. And then it says, but why not? Certainly our trustees and service workers are no less conscientious, experienced, and wiser than the delegates. Is there any good reason their votes are undesirable? Clearly there is none. Hence, we ought to be wary of any future tendency to deny our trustees or our service people their conference vote. And then it reminds us again, except in special situations that involve past performances, job qualifications, money compensation, or in the case of a sweeping reorganization of the General Service Board itself. In none of those situations should the trustees be voting, or the service workers. But then it says this, and I want to share with you. I share with this because I even share this for the trustees who might get mad at me if I have a different opinion. But this is my experience on the General Service Board. I'm not a trustee today. I don't know if it's the experience today, but it's my experience. It says right here, however, this can never be construed as a bar to trustees' vote on structural changes. And then the important line, it is also noteworthy that in actual practice, our trustees and headquarters people have yet never voted in a block. Their differences of opinion among themselves are nearly always as sharp and considerable as those to be found among the delegates themselves. That is the General Service Board that I served for 4 years. That is the AAWS board that I served for 8 years. A group of smart people who loved AA, who were not afraid to have their own opinion, but not all the same. I ask people all the time, or I get my answer, because I get asked a common question a lot. And it usually comes from people who love AA service and think about, wow, maybe someday I could be a trustee. And I don't think there's anything wrong with someone wanting to be a trustee. And I want every member of AA to know that you have the ability to be a trustee. But whenever somebody asks me, Billy, what do you think the number one quality is to be a trustee or a non-trustee director? And I'll tell you what the number one quality is. If your daily peace of mind and serenity are dependent on you always getting your own way, don't become a trustee. Don't become a non-trustee director. And I would also say, don't become an area delegate. If you have to get your own way, otherwise you're going to be miserable and pissed off. You know what breaks my heart? When I love running into people who are so passionate and they have an opinion on everything in service. I love people like that. But you know what breaks my heart? When I run into people like that who didn't get their own way and they're pissed off at the world and they are angry at the very organization that saved their life and they're super resentful. That is not a way to go through AA service. Listen, Scott, the chair of the General Service Board, was here a couple of weeks ago. I think he brought up a situation that me and him got into in front of a bunch of World Service delegates who were there for the weekend. They were spectators, like at a cage fight, you know? And Scott and I did not agree whatsoever on this particular subject. Scott and I are friends. Scott loves AA. 90% of the time, we agree probably. But the line here, it describes Scott and I on that particular issue. The differences among them are as sharp and considerable as the delegates themselves. And, you know, if I say anything about the AA of today, the conference, the boards, or anything, the more you can appreciate that you're not always right, that the group conscience knows better than you, the freer you will be. Who wants to be involved in something that's going to make your AA life worse? Who wants to go through the big book and be resentment free, and maybe you're current on your amends and maybe you're the best big book thumper in the history of big book thumpers, and yet you're all pissed off because of some vote at AA service? It makes no sense whatsoever. Respect to the group conscience is the ultimate, most important thing that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous. We are a constantly self-correcting organization. What we voted on one time, we don't vote on again. But it all comes down to the right of participation. Now, what I'll say here, this is where all the area delegates are going to get mad at me. And I know, because I've seek professional help, it's true. I've had a resentment or two against AA service. It's happened. And I had to have somebody explain to me that people who really love an organization, like sometimes I'll be sitting at a meeting or something, like when I was a trustee or a director, and I'm like, wow, how did they vote that way? If they were like had a conscience, they would never vote that way. How could they say that? Like my mind has gone. But you know, this person helped me understand that people who love an organization, like alcoholics love AA, sometimes we get blinded and we say something or do something because we love it so much. We want to protect it so much. We never want to admit that an area or a district or a board or the General Service Conference could be wrong. Like we're so out there. And those things do, you know, happen from time to time. But what I would tell you is that it's very freeing to not let that upset you. it's very freeing to understand that, you know, let me not piss off the big book thumpers, but there's no such thing as alcoholic thinking. The big book calls it other human problems. Like we have human problems, right? On top of our alcoholism. But one of the things that areas don't like me to talk about, because it's a problem in many of the 93 areas. And I'm not saying this as an opinion. I have personally been to 87 of the 93 assemblies, okay? In the last 30 years. 83, 87 out of 93. If you open up the service manual to the chapter on the assembly, you'll see that they have the voting percentages to match up with concept 4, like the conference. Except instead of delegates having 66% of the vote, it's GSRs, and then DCMs, and then area officers. That's if each area applied concept 4 to their business, we'd be in a lot of trouble. If the voting representation had to be 66% GSRs at a lot of area assemblies, there'd be a lot of business not going on. And that is something that worries me for sure. Like, how's the triangle flipped upside down a little inside areas? And remember, we've created all these positions the last 30 years, 40 years that we didn't have. We didn't have alternate deputy registrars. We didn't have many, for a long time, there was no alternate delegate. The area chair was the alternate delegate. Now we have a whole table full of positions and alternates. And all I'm saying is, if you read the original conference charter and you read the original service manual, area assemblies was supposed to mirror the conference as far as a reasonable proportion of voting. And sometimes we don't see that in certain areas. Some areas we do. So that's it. I am going to go to questions. I am going to remind everyone, no conference topics. If you've seen the letters to the board or anything about trustee and director resignations, those go directly to your delegate. That is who to bring them to. I'm not saying that you don't have a right to have a question. I asked my delegate. 6 trustees or directors have resigned, been asked to resign, or been removed in 24 months. That's never happened before. 6 in 24. It makes me think, like, I don't care about the individual issues. I care about what's going on between the conference and the board that's creating people to leave. I have a right to ask that question to my delegate. You have a right to ask that question to your delegate, just not to me. So there's a question here. Please elaborate on how unanimous voting does not equal unity and the dangers of groupthink. Sure. I mean, let's just talk about at the board level and the conference level. If you have a totally hot topic with strong feelings, we're supposed to have the best and the brightest that are serving in those positions. If all of them agree 100%, it seems impossible to me based on our history. Like, give and take and flexibility is what made AA stay here for all these 90 years. When I think that something is just unanimous, like, are people just rubber stamping? Now, some things are easy to be unanimous. I'm not saying there should never be a unanimous vote. But I don't think there's anything wrong when the trustees or the conference or the boards have a hot issue and they reach a group decision, a group conscience by 2/3. And there's some people who don't vote the same way. I don't think there's anything wrong with the board reporting, hey, we had a vote, we had a group conscience. There were some people who were in the minority, but the group conscience prevails. I like to think that people are really not afraid to speak up. And I see it happen. I see it happen at all levels of service. I see DCMs and area people who are more worried about becoming delegate than doing the right job. And have I probably seen delegates who are more worried about becoming trustee than being delegates? Yeah, of course. No doubt about it. Let's see. Why am I holding out on the last 6 areas? That is a very, very good question. I just have timing has not been right. But hopefully I will get to those areas. Let's see. What does a block mean? A block means that like the trustees, here's what a block means like in the ultimate Illuminati conspiracy theory gatherings, okay? It means that the trustees are all getting together and deciding how they're going to vote at the conference, and they're all going to vote the same way. It does not happen. It does not happen. I've never seen it happen. Bright individuals who have their own opinions on many things. Let's see. Second paragraph, page 13, concept 4 says staff members can participate but cannot vote. Does that mean paid staff workers? That's only for the trustee committees. And that's only for the conference committees that a paid staff member doesn't have a vote. The paid staff members, who have AA Grapevine has 3, the general service office has like 14. The people who have the AA staff positions, literature, CPC, treatment, group services, international conventions and regional forums, corrections, staff coordinator, all of those positions have a vote. At AA World Services, there's 9 directors, 4 are trustees, 3 are non-trustee directors, and 2 are paid staff people. The general manager of GSO and the staff coordinator are members of the AAWS board. But all the staff members attend the board meetings, just not the confidential sections. GSO does a really good job at getting staff to participate for sure. Let's see. Okay, yes, somebody has their camera off for health reasons. Listen, you do whatever you need to do for your own health. Absolutely. I visited an area business meeting this past weekend and was impressed by the resemblance of the conference room to a Roman arena. The gladiators on the floor were observed by the many nobles on the dais. Wow. I don't know where that was, but all I know is I was very worried about the letters that came out the last 2 weeks. So I checked how many area assemblies there were this past weekend. And thank God there were a lot. So no one knows what area assembly they're talking about. I'm sorry it looks that way. As you know, I'm not a big believer in daises. It is nothing against any particular area. I think one podium for who's ever speaking, but lots of areas do it differently. I'm also against past delegate tables. A lot of areas do it. I just don't know why we would want to put all that brain power and all that experience at one table and not spread it around to help the people who are trying to understand what they're hearing. Let's see. When should a group in my district consult with another group? Let's see. Maybe if you were going to have some kind of workshop, you might want to tell them just so that you could invite them. Maybe if you wanted to meet in the same building at the same time, you might want to tell them. Maybe if you were meeting in the same building, but at a different time and day, you want to let them know that they have nothing to worry about, that you're going to take care of that building like they take care of it. Billy, what were the 4 places you separated in this concept? Okay, last time, here we go. Throughout our conference structure, we ought to maintain all responsible levels of traditional right of participation. 1, taking care that each classification or group of world servants. 2, shall be allowed a voting representation. 3, in reasonable proportion to the responsibility that each must discharge. 4. The concept mentions that we shouldn't have any participants as second-class citizens. Do you have any suggestions on how areas and in districts could address this if the issue arises or maybe prevent it? Sure. Make sure everybody who should have a vote has a vote. No second-class citizens. There should be never any second-class citizens in Alcoholics Anonymous. Which trustee could I stand for not having been a delegate? Well, if you want the letter of the law, if you're an alcoholic, you could stand for any of the 3 alcoholic Class B positions. You do not have to be a delegate to be a trustee at large, a regional trustee, or a general service trustee. Now, practically speaking, a high percentage, like between 99.9 and 100 of trustees at large and regional trustees are past delegates. But if you've not been a delegate and you have a lot of service experience, maybe you want to apply to be a non-trustee director on one of the corporate boards, AAWS or AA Grapevine, because those you have to be a non-trustee director in order to be a general service trustee. That's the way it works. So those 4 positions are out there. And I would tell you that you should make yourself available if you think you're qualified. I don't think we do a good enough job spreading the message about non-trustee director applications and the people and what we're looking for. Do you see a correlation between the flipping of the triangle at the area level related to members revolving around the dais and service positions? Like rotation has become diluted and there is not enough new blood coming through. This is my honest opinion based on all areas. I've lived in area 19, area 44, area 15. It is nothing to do with any of those areas. This is my personal feeling. We have so many positions now that it would take like 20 years for the average person to hold most of them to become a delegate. I do not believe in promotions. I do not believe that there should be a service path that's in stone. I do not believe anything like the hip bone is connected to the thigh bone is connected to the knee. Like, if you don't think you would be a good secretary, don't stand for secretary. But I mean, I think we should elect the best people. Now, if someone shows up and decides they want to stand for delegate and they've never done anything else, well, use your judgment when you're voting. But I know some very good delegates who are never alternate delegates. Why do we have a third legacy election if there's not a promotion? It's to make sure that the right person. Now, I'm not saying most alternate delegates shouldn't become delegate. But my friend Tom M. in Northeast Texas, he was never an alternate delegate. He was a damn good delegate. I know lots of people like that. I just am against any kind of promotion or any kind of you do this, you do that. And what I am really against, and this is where service sponsorship has kind of destroyed Alcoholics Anonymous. If I could, maybe mention something from, I see one person here who probably knows this, but like John Q, who passed away, while he served as a service sponsor to many, he had a different view of service sponsorship. It wasn't to tell people exactly what to do. It wasn't to tell people what font size should be on their flyer. And it definitely wasn't tell them what they shouldn't or should stand for, but simply to give advice and share experience. When I hear people have been told by people not to stand for something because they didn't hold the right jobs, it's not our job. There's only two questions at elections. Are you qualified and are you willing and available? If you meet those two prerequisites, then you let God sort it out. Not somebody who thinks they should be playing God for your area. Let's see. Since the traditions are written for groups, to meetings that follow the traditions were not written for groups. They were written for all of AA. The concepts, the charter, says that Bill and Bob left AA to the groups. And the groups carry that out through their concept 2 right to elect a delegate. But meetings are just as much AA, but they have decided to not participate in the conference structure. Groups are who concept 1 and concept 2 talks about. So, is next week concept 5? Yes, it is. Next week is concept 5 and tradition 5. So, we will go through that. I'll give one more minute if anybody has any last minute questions. I'll take one more. Please go to your delegate about any current issues in AA. Do not be afraid to tell them you'd like to give them your 2 cents. They might be willing and open to hear it. As long as you're willing and open to believe that they don't have to believe the same way you believe. And that they're the one getting to vote this year, not you. As long as you can accept that, you should be able to have a good conversation. So I'll answer this question 2 ways, because the question that's asked, what they describe, happens in my area. I know it happens in other areas too, but it happens in my area. And the question is simply, if a GSR can't make motions, are they a second-class citizen and not have the right of participation? If you asked me that sitting in a Waffle House at 2:00 in the morning, going on my second pack of Marlboros or Newports for the day 10 or 20 years ago, I probably would have told you, absolutely, it's garbage, it's crazy. How could a GSR not have a motion making ability, but yet has a right to vote on things? However, in the areas that do that, including my own, that's their group conscience. And if somebody doesn't like it in any area, they should find a way to get a motion in. And I got to believe there must be other people who can make motions in all of the areas that don't let GSRs make motions. And that's the other thing. And let me, close on this. It's really important to understand all 93 areas do business differently. There are some areas that only let GSRs vote. DCM's area officers do not have votes on motions. Up until recently, there was still one area left. It changed a couple of years ago, where they had city and country, or urban and country, voting style. And if you don't know what that is, states that only have one delegate, where there's big urban areas that have lots of groups, the rural farming communities in those states felt like they never had, they were never really represented. So there was one area where if you were a city GSR, you got one vote. And if you were a rural GSR, your group got 2 votes. But my point is, there's lots of different rules, and it's so important for you to know your area's guidelines, or your area handbook, or your area current practice, so that you know how your area does business. The service manual, by the way, the concepts are conference approved literature, approved through the Conference Literature Committee in 1961, if you were curious where that happened. That's where the book, The 12 Concepts, was approved. It went through the Literature Committee, approved by the conference. The short form of the concepts did not go through a committee, was not really a floor action because the conference was a little looser at that time, but was introduced by the chair in 1971, and the conference voted to accept them. But the front part of the service manual, the actual service manual, is not a policy document. People get all up in arms. You're not doing it like this. You ever see someone at line? You ever been at an assembly and someone's at line with the service manual, like opened, paper clipped, highlighted, ready to just go to town when that microphone gets called on them? Like, I'm just letting people know, the service manual is a suggestive, prescriptive document to explain how service gets done. It is not a policy document. That gets found in other things. At the General Service Conference, there's a description of conference committees in the service manual. But at the General Service Conference, you know we love acronyms. We love CSPs, composition, scope, and procedures. Every conference committee has a CSP. That's a policy document. Every trustees committee has a CSP. A lot of trustee committees, like nominating, have procedures. Nominating procedure number 2, nominating procedure number 14, nominating procedure number 12. Those are all policies, like when you vote on something at your area. But the service manual is a helpful guidebook, but not to be used as policy. So that's it. We will be back next week. I hope that you all are going to your conference, whatever you have in your area, however you give feedback to your delegates. I hope that you all, if you see your delegate, thank them for taking the time out of their life. Taking a week is not easy. I know everybody talks, oh, they get to go to New York. Believe me, it's not like you just won a trip to New York with like 8 Broadway plays and 6 games and everything else. If you go in a little before or a little after, maybe you get to go to a play or so. But those 6 days, it's like being at boot camp. You get up early. They tell you where to go. You have to eat the same food as everyone else. They tell you where to go in the afternoon. You have to eat where they tell you at night for dinner. Then you have to go back into the room. Then maybe you go late. It's, if you see your delegate, and I stress this, even if you don't get along or don't agree with your delegate about most things, you could thank them for taking the time. You could thank your alternate for being ready to go if your delegate can't go. I think it's even more important to do if you think you don't agree with your delegate a lot. I always say that about people that I don't agree with in AA. Like, if there is a person who I disagree with the most, who I know says horrible things about me, the one thing I have to admit myself is for about 20 years in a row, that person loves AA so much that 2 years at a time, they held a new commitment in service to Alcoholics Anonymous. 2 years after 2 years after 2 years after 2 years. And whether they like me or not, or whether we agree, I have to respect them for that commitment to the fellowship that saved my life more than anything else. I just wish more people maybe would. I think about people like Don P. and John S. and John Q. and some others, John S. from Washington, D.C., another John S., Arnold R. from Maryland. I think about some of my heroes out there, and they always were respectful of the group conscience, even if they disagreed with people. And they never looked like AA made their life miserable. Like, if you knew the first John S. I mentioned, he drove a truck for the phone company. When his trustee application got submitted, he was still the owner of an Irish bar in South Orange, New Jersey. He spoke with an Irish brogue. When he was sober, he was the grand marshal of the South Orange St. Patrick's Day Parade. But you know where you would find him? At the Shuralon Club in Belmar, across the street from the boardwalk, like shaking newcomers' hands on the way into a meeting when he was a past trustee. Like, if service is not making you love Alcoholics Anonymous, I would just ask you to really get in touch with what's really causing that. And, the other day I was not too far from where I'm sitting right now, a couple of miles away, listening to a fifth step from a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I thought to myself, like, I don't care if you're a GSR, a DCM, a corrections chair, a delegate, a trustee. You want to prepare well for your service commitment? Listen to a fifth step. That'll give you most of the training you need. And why would you want to be so resentful against the organization that saved all our lives? So that's it. I am going to close with the responsibility statement. I'll just say this before I say the responsibility statement. It's one of those things that's misquoted all the time. People have their own definition of it. Anywhere, whatever. It means we help everybody. Please, if you have an As Bill Sees It story, book, it's divided up by numbered stories, like a page each. The last page, not of Daily Reflections, but of As Bill Sees It, is the story of the responsibility statement and where it comes from. And I guess it's in Daily Reflections, but it's definitely in As Bill Sees It. And you got to read it. You got to know where that statement comes from and what it has to do with. So I'm going to close with that. I am responsible. When anyone, anywhere reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA always to be there. And for that, I am responsible. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks for your service to Alcoholics